Grace and peace to you from the Grace Church on the Hill. We've been exploring the life and the poetry of T.S. Eliot, the Nobel Prize-winning poet and dramatist, literary critic, and convert to Christianity. And that's where we are right now. I'm going to talk about his conversion in 1927. This Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri, Unitarian, Harvard-educated philosopher, poet, moves to England to reinvent himself, becomes more English than the English, samples Bloomsbury society, knows all the intellectual currents of post-war years, mixes in that society, works for Lloyd's Bank. He wants a decent, steady income, but writes poetry on the weekends. Then he becomes an editor at Faber and Faber, the publisher. But unfortunately, his personal life is a shamble. His marriage to Vivian is distressing. It's anguishing. It's impossible. And he struggles with the idea of leaving her. But he cares for her, and he is morally very responsible for her. But out of this sort of depressed, melancholic sense of failure in every part of his life, and we've seen that echoed in his poetry, The Wasteland, The Hollow Men, he decides to become a Christian. He's haunted by remorse, by what might have been, the choices he made. And of course, ultimately, there's a sense of this fear of damnation, this sense of being forever lost, forgotten, exiled, alienated from God. So he decides to be baptized. And he has a friend, an American friend, poet friend, who's a chaplain of Worcester College, Oxford, and he asked them if he might be baptized, but of course secretly. So they lock the doors so no one can see. He doesn't want to exhibit this publicly or have it written up. So he is baptized in June the 29th, 1927, in Oxford. And then the next day, the Bishop of Oxford confirms him in his private chapel in Oxford. The end of one identity, one life, the beginning of a new life. And what this conversion does for Eliot is gives him, in a sense, a monastic discipline, an order, a form, a structure to his life. And he becomes intensely conscientious about devotions. In London, he gets the bus at 6:30 in the morning up to Gloucester Road to his parish church, St. Stephen's, near the Victoria and Albert Museum, near the Royal Albert Hall, Kensington. And he goes to early morning mass most days, and then takes the bus back and has breakfast and does crossword and plays a bit of cards before getting down to work. And that becomes his discipline, his chosen asceticism. Out of disorder, chaos, dissipation, destruction, emptiness, the wasteland, comes this rebirth, this healing of this fragmented self who felt much more chosen than choosing. I don't know whether you have that sense. It's not that you choose this, you are impinged upon, you are, since, chosen, called. That's what Eliot felt. Some mocked him as a Calvinist in Anglican clothing, but I think they've just rarely seen such a disciplined Anglican. He was a traditionalist, they said, who resembled a senior civil servant, dining at Tory clubs, wearing a bowler suit, pinstriped, rolled umbrella, very much a company man, and yet old possum. Beneath that seemingly dead exterior, there was a very vast and fruitful inner life. Well, at the time of his conversion, famously, he says about his identity, I'm a classicist in literature, I'm a royalist in politics, and I'm an Anglo-Catholic in religion. Wow, what a makeover. A classicist in literature. But the whole 19th century Romantic project was just anti-classical. Here's this American from St. Louis, Missouri. He says he's a royalist, renouncing his republicanism. And what about this New England Harvard Unitarian, eschewing that whole identity to assume this new mantle, this new baptismal? He says, I'm an Anglo-Catholic, anchoring him in the great 2,000-year-old Christian tradition of medieval Europe. So he pushes against that romantic Rousseau tradition of rampant individualism, the show-offness of the artist. He rebels against that easy, breezy, positive power of self-help thinking, of American Unitarian republicanism. And he prioritizes what might say the Western Catholic tradition of Europe. And of course, he's reading Dante. Dante. He's reading Thomas Aquinas, the great medievalists. And he wants to reconstruct civilization on a kind of ordered hierarchy. And he's resourcing the Christian past, the Christian tradition, to try and do that. So he doesn't want to destroy, he wants to reclaim, renew, recover, resource. I want to read to you the poem of a recent convert. It's his 1927 poem, The Journey of the Magi. It's so brilliantly set to music in 1971 by the British composer Benjamin Britten. But it's the story of the three kings, isn't it? From the second chapter of Matthew's Gospel. The journey of the Magi to see the newborn Christ. It's a journey of epiphany, but it's a journey which comes to an end, and there's no going back the same old way. What they have seen, what they have experienced, the illumination, the apocalypsis, can only propel them forward on a new journey. The end is just the start of the beginning. It's a wonderful poem. And in Benjamin Britten's setting of it, and you might want to catch it on YouTube, the three kings are set for bass, baritone, tenor, and countertenor. And I love the setting of Eliot's poem. That's what great art does. It takes a great poem and puts a great musical setting to it. This is the poetry of a convert. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of the year for a journey, and such a long journey, the ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter, and the camels galled, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting their liquor and women, and the night fires going out, and the lack of shelter, and the cities hostile, and the towns unfriendly, and the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end, we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices singing in our ears, saying that this was all folly. Then at dawn, we came down to a temperate valley, wet, below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a water mill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on the low sky, and an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel, 6 hands at an open door dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wine skins. But there was no information. So we continued and arrived at evening, not a moment too soon, finding the place. It was, you may say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again. But set down this, were we led all that way for birth or death? There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another death. The retrospect of one of the 3 kings, the Magi. What that pilgrimage journey to the illumination of Christ, the transforming effect, the epiphany of that moment. There was no going back to the old dispensation, the old kingdoms with their alien people clutching their gods. It felt like death, this birth. It felt like our death. It was bitter, it was hard, agony, anguished. But then he says, as I guess we all say looking back after a very hard episode in life, journey in life, and we come out to a place of oasis, and of new start, fresh beginning. I should be glad of another death. How shall we come out of this pandemic moment? Grace and peace to you from Grace Church on the Hill in Toronto.